Say you have these two variables, name and n, defined, and you want to print out, hello, name, nice to meet you, n times. Well, of course this isn't going to work. You definitely can't say, hello, name, nice to meet you, n times. Okay, for example, how would Python know that this n was special and should be substituted, whereas this n is not special and should not be substituted? So we need some other way, and eventually I'm going to talk about fstrings, which I think is the best way. But let me show you some other ways that might come to your mind first. So one example, or maybe I'll start with the one that I think I use least often, which is to give multiple arguments to print. So I could say, hello, okay, and then, so think of this as the first argument to print. Think of this as the next argument to print. Notice how there's no quotation marks around it. So Python's going to have to change it from this variable name to the string that it represents. And then here's this nice to meet you. Okay, then n, I'll leave it on its own. And then here times again is a string. So that's pretty cumbersome what I was just doing, but this is one option that more or less works. Like, for example, here I wanted to have a comma after the name. And if I try to do that, for example, like this, notice how this space shows up before the comma. So there's probably some way to get around that, but I don't really want to emphasize it because this isn't one of the best ways to make this kind of string get printed out. So what's another way? So let me just copy this. Okay, well, I guess I also need the print for the way I'm talking about it, but if you just list a string without the print in a Jupyter notebook, it also gets printed, so it doesn't really matter in that case. So I think this way is a little nicer. I'm going to use string concatenation. And it doesn't really matter where the spaces are, I'm just thinking about what looks nice. So I'm getting rid of all of the commas other than the commas that occur in the string, but those argument commas, I'm getting rid of those. And so this is going to give me an error. Can you see why it's going to give me an error? So it says, can only concatenate string, not int, to string. Do you see what that's referring to? So this n, if you look up here, it's not in quotation marks. So this is an integer, not a string. So if I want to use this sort of syntax where I'm using plus, then I should write str here. Okay, pretty good. And now I guess I just need some extra spaces, but that is more because I did not need them in the original print that I left them out. But I don't think of this as a downside to this way of printing it. Okay, so I think that is pretty much fine. Let me get rid of the print, and let me just show you the string portion so that the print doesn't distract from the rest of it. So there is a string method. Okay, so this is like a function that's defined for strings called format. And so here in this format, I'm going to say I want the first thing to be name, the second thing to be n. And then I just put empty curly brackets in here. And then what Python is going to do is it's going to take the first argument to format and replace the first curly brackets with that argument, and similarly, second curly brackets get replaced by the second argument. And you'll see this pretty often when you read other people's Python code because fstrings, they're relatively new as an addition to Python. I'm recording this in summer 2022 with Python 3.10, and they first arrived in Python 3.6, so not that long ago. These fstrings that I'm going to show you next. So let me just paste this in, and here's the fstring method. So the way you tell Python that this is going to be an fstring is you put an f in front of the quotation marks. So this part here tells Python this is going to be an fstring. And the nice thing is it's very similar to this format method, but I don't need format and inside the curly brackets goes the argument. Okay, so for example, I put name into curly brackets, and I put n into curly brackets. Okay, and I think that is much more readable. And for example, say you had 8 different arguments that you wanted to substitute in. It's going to be much easier to do that with this fstring method because you can just look at the curly brackets and instantly know what is the variable that's supposed to go in there. So this is an example of an fstring, and when you have variables that you want to include in a string, I think you should always do it with an fstring. So only other thing I want to do in this video is show some options that go along with string formatting. So as an example, let me define m to be 3 to the 20, so some big number. And say I just want to print this out using an fstring. Okay, so then I can just put m inside these curly brackets. And that gets printed out. Only difference is this one was an integer. This one, you can tell because of the quotation marks, this one's a string. So why am I showing you this? Well, I want to show you some of the options for formatting these kind of integers. So the way you specify that the formatting is about to show up is you put a colon and then the formatting you want to do. And there's an overwhelming number of these formats that you can do. And don't worry about memorizing any of them for now. All I want is for you to know that these sorts of options exist, and then you can go look them up if you need to. So for example, if I do :e, then that writes it in exponential notation. If I do :dot for f, so the f is saying this is going to be viewed as a floating point number. And the .4 says you want four places after the decimal place. What if I do 1 over m? Okay, so this is like 1 divided by 3 to the 20th. Well, it's not very helpful in this way because it looks like all zeros. But if I do some larger number of digits after the decimal place, then I get to see the full number. And if you just try to do 1 over m by itself, then by default, Python uses exponential notation for these very small numbers, for these numbers that are really close to 0. And so if you want to prevent that, you can prevent it using this string formatting. I think the only other example I want to show, let's go back to a smaller number. Let's do z equals 17. And then I can say fstring z. And then here for the formatting I'm going to do :b. And can you tell what that refers to? That's saying print out this integer in binary. So this is like 1 plus 0 times 2 plus 0 times 4 plus 0 times 8 plus 1 times 16. So 17 in total, it's 16 plus 1. And here we get it written in binary. Okay, whereas if we were to do this, for example, with m, that 3 to the 20th number, then we're going to get some huge expansion here in binary. So this is how you write 3 to the 20th in binary.